Yesterday we heard Jesus answering the question of a Pharisee, of a lawyer who knew the law of the scriptures, about which commandment is the greatest. And part of what was unique about Jesus' answer was that he said, you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you are to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus connecting the love of God directly with the love of our neighbor, that was significant. But him saying that we are to love our neighbor was not something new. Just like the first part of what he said came from Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, the second part about loving our neighbor, Jesus was referring the lawyer and us back to the book of Leviticus. And in Leviticus chapter 19, that whole chapter is really about how to live a life of holiness in ancient Israel and how the Israelites were called to holiness. And verse 18, which is the verse of the day, says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And if you think back to the Ten Commandments, in the Ten Commandments, the first four commandments relate to our relationship with God vertically, right? No other gods before me, no graven image, don't misuse my name, make sure you observe a Sabbath, you take a day of worship and rest and renewal, you stop working. The first four of the Ten Commandments relate to our relationship with God. The last six of the commandments all relate to our relationships with other people, whether that's honoring your father and mother and not committing murder and not stealing and not committing adultery, not coveting, right? Not bearing false witness. All of those six commandments relate to our relationships with people. And I find it interesting that when Jesus says what's the greatest or most important law to follow, well, vertically, just like in the Ten Commandments, we're to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And then we're to love our neighbor as ourself, which is those horizontal relationships, that we show how we love God by how we love and treat other people. It's really, to me, interesting because when Jesus talks about loving our neighbor, he has a very expansive view of who our neighbor is. You may remember Pastor David preaching back on October 8th about the great story of the Good Samaritan, where the lawyer in that case who was questioning Jesus was trying to limit his responsibility to his neighbors by asking, who is my neighbor? Is it just basically my fellow Israelite, or is it larger than that? And Jesus' answer in telling the story of the Good Samaritan, and his answer here in Matthew 22, is the same. You're to love your neighbor, and your neighbor is anyone in need. Anyone you come in contact with who you can help in some way. We want to make sure that our heart for people is expansive as God's heart is for us and for all the world. It's part of what makes the tragedy of the wars that are continuing to unfold and the violence both between Russia and Ukraine, between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza, is that innocent people, just like you and me, non-combatants, people just trying to live their lives, are all dying and facing unbelievable hardship and heartache and grief. And I think this grieves the heart of God. We are to love our neighbors, all of them.